does. So given the preference, they'll take the salmon. If nothing else is around, sure, they may eat trout, but it is definitely not their preference. So let me make sure there was, or do they eat whatever they catch? Well, yeah, again, if that's all they can find, sure, they'll eat it, but not the preference.
It really does depend on how hungry the bear is. And we'll have to apologize too. We're going to be rubbing our face once in a while. You may be able to see the
Bugs.
the black flies that are coming around. And we had frost this morning, and I thought most of these would die off, but we still have a lot of black flies around right now. And locally, they're commonly called white socks. So if you ever hear us throw out that term, that's what we were talking about.
And if you're keeping score, I've eaten one so far. How many have you eaten?
None today.
None?
No.
Okay. We have to be careful. If we talk too long and then we breathe in, that's when we suck them right down. And I still have one clinging for life at the back of my throat right now. So I'm sometimes going, trying to get it out of there.
But each, whether or not a bear is going to, be eating a trout versus a salmon, it does depend on the bear. It depends on how hungry they are, of course. Younger bears, I've seen younger bears, subadult bears, maybe they can't compete for the best fishing spots here along Brooks River, especially in July. They're going to be picking up basically any parts of fish that they can scavenge. The really big, dominant bears that can afford to defend the best fishing spots up at Brooks Falls, they're going to be the ones that can't afford, when the salmon are really running thick in the river, to only eat the fattiest parts of the fish. And a lot of a bear's behavior really does boil down to the economics of energy. What fishing strategy, for instance, is going to give them the most profit in calories? Because again, they're economists. They're looking to make a profit, but their currency is not money. It's not dollars and bills, or excuse me, bills and coins, but it's actually calories. So any strategy that you have, or any really behavior that you see bears partaking in, that's probably based on a successful strategy for them to gain as much fat as possible and make a big profit before they go to their dens.
Next question is a great one. That I always like talking about this one when we get it, but you can answer it, Mike. It's
sure.
When the cubs grow up and come across one another, do they recognize one another as siblings, or are they perhaps a little more tolerant of one another as adults?
They do recognize one another as siblings. At least it seems like. Bears are extremely smart animals, just as smart as any domestic dog. And, of course, we don't know for sure because we can't go down and we can't ask the bear, hey, do you know that bear over there? Because we think that bear's your sibling. And do you recognize it? Of course, we can't ask them that. But it does seem like they recognize one another. And all of these, I shouldn't say all of them, but many of the bears here in the Brooks River encounter one another repeatedly year after year after year. And they recognize each other by sight. They recognize each other by scent, too, because that is certainly their most powerful sense, is their sense of smell. So they're often recognizing each other through those two things. As far as whether they show a greater tolerance for one another, that's something that we can't really say for sure. I'm willing to say maybe in some instances, but in most instances, no. In fact, in a bear's world, they're only looking out for one bear, and that's themselves. They're only looking for themselves. And in fact, this summer, I was up at Brooks Falls watching some bears in the evening during my time off, and there were two bears fishing at the falls, and these bears are thought to be siblings. One of the bears is a bit bigger and a bit more dominant than the other bear, and they're both adult males. That other bear, the bigger one of the sibling pair, he came in and he pushed his brother right out of the best fishing spot up at Brooks Falls. So again, he wasn't going to wait his turn to catch fish at that spot. He's looking out for only himself. So that's an instance that maybe shows that they don't really have a greater level of tolerance for one another, even though they happen to be siblings.
If you think about that, that selfishness extends all the way to the time when they're in the dens and just being born. They don't share the milk with their siblings.
Absolutely.
If you're slightly larger, slightly stronger, slightly more aggressive than your litter mates, you grab on to the teat that has the highest milk flow, and you don't want to give that up for any reason. And we see it here all the time with Bead Nose has 3 cubs, and the runt, if it's not in there fighting, trying to get that fish, the second mother brings it ashore, it's not going to stand a chance because the other 2 much larger siblings are not going to share that. They really look out for themselves.
And I'm not sure which way the cams are really pointed right now, but I did just catch a glimpse of number 409 and her 3 yearling cubs. So if they're on the cams and you're watching them, the cubs are very blonde, and you'll see that there are 2 larger ones and there's 1 smaller one. So there is a high level of competition within the litter. Just like some people, some bears grow slower than others. Maybe they don't, the smaller one of that litter just doesn't have the genes that allow it to grow as fast as the other 2. But definitely the other 2 seem to be dominating the food resources more than that smaller bear. So they're not sharing with sister or brother. They're looking out for only themselves.
So I just referred to a bear called Bead Nose, and you referred to a bear called 409.
Oh yes. Yeah, I have a bad habit of using numbers.
If you're confused about all the numbers and names, we have 2 ways that we can help you. One, if you go to the National Park Service webpage at nps.gov/KATM, or you can also just go to go.nps.gov/bearcam. It'll take you to the BearCam pages on the National Park Service site, and you can download a book, a PDF, it's free, that will list most of the commonly seen bears around Brooks Camp, and it'll give you their names and numbers and tell you a little bit about their life history. Or if you have an iPad and you prefer to have an iBook, you can go to iTunes and do a search for Brown Bears of Brooks River, and then you can, I probably won't be able to show, there's too much reflection, but you can get this book, which has more photos, more information, some videos that'll help you identify. Both of those are free, and if you get addicted to watching the bears here and want to learn more about them, that's a great way to learn a little more about each of those bears. It's not every bear again, but it are the ones that it does include the ones that we see more commonly. And I know another question came in, and I already forgot what it was. Perhaps we weren't very clear. The 2 bears that we're fighting, we know that one, or we believe that one was nicknamed Chunk. The other one we don't know because we were on the other side of the river and didn't have a great view of it. So it's possible that we know who the bear is. We just couldn't identify it. And they were performing, and they're both adult bears. One's just bigger than the other one. And they were doing play fighting, which is not incredibly common amongst adult bears. But if you have adult bears that have a good healthy fat layer and they know there's lots of food in the river and they're currently full, they could either sleep.
Started fishing right away. So, once there's some space in their bellies, they're going to try to fill it up as much as they can.
Yep. It's sort of like us. When you're hungry, you don't think about going out and playing a game of tennis. You think about going and finding something to eat. So bears the same way. And we did get some other questions in.
Yeah, so a couple of questions, and they're sort of related to one another. When will the bears go into hibernation?
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so the bears will go into hibernation mostly toward the very end of October and the first part of November if you are a female with cubs, and then beginning that time but extending much later, single bears, and especially that it's time to go. So it's not set in stone when they go, and it's not just because it's cold. It's not just because it started to snow. It's a combination of all of these things and the availability of food. Hibernation is a way that they can beat the winter where there's nothing around really to eat. Aside from the large run of salmon we nuts or moths eating the whitebark pines in Yellowstone, they take advantage of those seasonal food sources, and when those seasonal food sources become scarce or non-existent, that's what triggers them to go into hibernation. So around here, when the salmon pickings become so sparse in the river that they may not go into their dens until much later, like we have seen them in December wandering around in king salmon. And I know in black bears and bears in other locations have some cases don't even go into hibernation. There's just ample food resources throughout the winter, and every year, not eating, not urinating, not defecating, living solely on fat, yet coming out without losing muscle mass, and putting on a third of their body weight in the summer and the fall without getting heart disease or joint problems. So really spectacular, and there's so much to talk about in
certain date or when they've eaten enough, and we kind of just got to that. The next question is sort of about the the actual structure of the den itself, and what covers the den. Do bears let snow seal themselves inside of the den? And what happens to old dens when they're done with them?
Before he answers that, I want to try something here with the camera. People always ask us where the bears den, and most of the time we can't show you because we're sitting in my cabin. But behind me, right here, oh, looking the wrong way, there is a mountain. That is Mount Dumpling. A lot of the bears at Brooks Camp will go up and den on the slopes of Mount Dumpling, pretty far up there. That's where they prefer to go. And if you watch Mike's video that he's recorded and posted on Flickr, you can see him going into one of the dens up there. So I'm going to spin around this way so you can see another mountain about the same location. I'm going to get this mirror thing right once for all. That's Mount Lagorce. They also will den on Mount Lagorce. And then I'm going to spin around here, and this one might be hard to pick out.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's a lot of...
There we go. Yeah. That is Tolerant. A lot of bears will den on Tolerant. And then the other mountains around here, you can't really see. Some trees are in the way. But those are the primary mountains in this area that the bears at Brooks Camp go to. It is not a really long walk. They are not hiking 60 miles away to go den. At least based on some studies that were done here in the 70s. They are going to these mountains that sort of fringe the Brooks Camp, Brooks River area.
And as far as I know, the bears basically let themselves get snowed in. So their den, if you haven't ever seen a bear den, at least for brown bears, and bears can use a wide variety of terrain and materials to make their dens. But here in Katmai, the bears are digging their dens on steep hillsides. They're not known to use tree cavities or rock crevices. They're basically just going straight into the hillsides, excavating a tunnel that goes back several feet, and it's just big enough for them to turn themselves around in. And they basically let themselves get snowed in. So to get back to that question, do bears let snow seal themselves? Yes. And there's no hole or anything like that they happen to maintain that allows gas to escape in and out. Their breathing rate actually is very, very slow when they're in their dens. If I remember correctly, it may be just 1 or 2 breaths per minute. So it's very, very slow. They're not really worried about suffocating. They're not taking in that much oxygen, and they're not really exhaling that much carbon dioxide. So it seems like even though they may have several feet of snow at the entrance of their dens, they're not going to suffocate because of that. And what happens to the dens after they're done with them? Basically, the dens are just abandoned after they come out in the springtime, and eventually over time they end up collapsing on themselves. The bears here in Katmai are not known to reuse dens from year to year. So each year they're going to be excavating a new den in the hillsides, up on Mount Dumpling right next to us over here. And there are places up there that's really good denning habitat. Steep slopes, fairly high elevations here, for Katmai anyway. They like to go up to around 1,300 feet in elevation on average. And that probably gives them access to really reliable snowpack. Because down here where we are along Naknek Lake, we're not really at a high elevation at all. We're probably about 60 feet or so right here. And if we get a big storm blowing off the Pacific Ocean, even in the middle of January, we can sometimes have thaw temperatures above freezing. We can get some rain and things like that. So if you're a bear and you're denning down at this elevation, then you don't want to be exposed to this wide fluctuations of temperatures, especially if it warms up and then it cools down to 30 below zero. That's going to put some hardship on you that you don't have to. So they'll go up in elevation to try to get to a place where they get to a more reliable snowpack. And afterwards, again, once they leave the den, that's it for the den. It's just home for them for just a few months.
The next question that we have is, are we planning on returning to Katmai as rangers next year? And we get that a lot. I think a lot of people know park rangers tend to travel around a lot and visit a lot of different national parks. But I think it's safe to say that Mike and I have no plans to not be here next year. But you just never know. I'm not saying we're leaving the door wide open for either of us to leave. But right now I think we're planning on being here.
Unless I get fired. And I think I said that in one
You said that last time, right?
Last time, yeah.
He said, yeah, unless Roy fires me. Let's see. Do the bears wake up at all during hibernation, or do they continuously sleep all winter?
Well, with bears, they don't actually wake up. They sleep continuously all winter. although they can be woken up fairly easily. Unlike other hibernating mammals, like a ground squirrel. Ground squirrel, for instance, needs a long period of time before it can boost its metabolism once again to be in a waking state and be active. But a bear can be aroused fairly quickly, sometimes within a matter of minutes itself. However, they don't wake up typically. We don't know too much about the habits of brown bears within our dens because we're not in the dens with them, of course. So really, what little we know about bears and their hibernation habits comes from studies done on maybe black bears in captivity, for instance, run through universities and things like that. So the bears are really not known to arouse themselves during the wintertime and wake up, although they do sometimes shiver. I mean, I think that's been documented, and that may help to maintain muscle mass when they're inside of the den. One really remarkable thing about bears, and this is different than all other mammals as far as I know, is that bears don't, of course, when they're in their dens, they don't eat, they don't drink, and they don't go to the bathroom either. So they basically are subsisting solely on their stored body fat for 5-6 months or more, and that's really a remarkable adaptation that no other mammals share with them. So a ground squirrel, for instance, a chipmunk, they're probably going to get up, they're going to go to the bathroom, things like that, but bears will not do that at all.
Yeah, so just to make it clear, they don't wake up on a regular basis, but they can be awakened. So if you have really, really warm days that occur in February, that might rouse them, and they might poke their heads out, take a look around. But they don't wake up on a regular basis in order to feed, to urinate, to defecate. But they can be awakened.
Yeah, and people can awaken them too. So,
Yeah.
I usually stay away from areas where bears den in the wintertime, partly because it's usually far away from where I'm living in the wintertime. But even in the spring, I want to stay away because I just don't want to stumble upon a sleeping bear, of course. And I think it's about halfway through the program, so maybe we could reintroduce ourselves if anyone's joining us late. And my name is Mike Fitz, and I'm the media ranger here at Katmai National Park and Preserve.
And my name is Roy Wood, and I'm the Chief of Interpretation for Katmai National Park and Preserve. And we're both here at Brooks Camp at the mouth of the Brooks River in the heart of Katmai National Park. And behind us, I don't know if we have any bears.
Not
right
right
now. We have a bear way over here on the lake shore, which is out of camera view. You won't see that, but this is an area that has a lot of bear activity this time of the year. As the salmon are dying after spawning, the bears are coming and feeding on them. It's very easy pickings for all the bears. All they have to do is walk around, sniff the air, and they can find a meal pretty easily. And if you are just joining us and you're not sure how to ask questions, you can ask questions on the explore.org webpage where perhaps this is being streamed. I'm not sure if there's a question feature on the explore.org/bearfund page or not.
I believe there is.
Is there one there?
I think I saw.
And you can also
today.
use Twitter and use the hashtag AskRangerRoy. And what they will do is they collect those questions and then they forward us on to the questions on to this iPad, and that's what Mike and I are looking at periodically. And we have 2 questions waiting in the queue right now. The first one, or the next one rather, is, "Hi Rangers, have you seen 402 and her cubs the last few days?"
I actually haven't. Last time I know that I saw her was last Wednesday night. And if you're not familiar with Bear 402, she's a fairly popular bear on the webcam because she has 3 spring cubs, and those or cubs of the year, and those cubs were born this past winter in January or February. So really, they're no more than 8 months old right now, 9 months old right now. And I know I saw her last Wednesday. She was right down here below the platform, and I was out here just bear viewing in the evening, and I had some really good bear watching opportunities with her right down beneath me. So she was around with her 3 cubs at that point in time. I'm not sure if we've seen her since. That doesn't necessarily mean that she got hurt or her cubs got hurt or anything like that. She may just be fishing out of our line of sight. So she may have found maybe the fishing conditions are better upstream, or maybe she's gone to a different salmon stream in the area, because the Brooks River isn't the only place where bears can get salmon at this time of the year, although it's one of the best places at this time in the area for bears to get salmon.
And I don't recall seeing her in the last few days either. But as Mike said, that when we don't see a bear for a couple of days, there's no reason for alarm there. They are off doing their own thing. And this time of the year, what they're doing is a lot of sleeping, which leads us to sleeping and eating. The next question is, do bears dream? And don't you wish you knew the answer to that? If I bet if they do, many of those recurring dreams that they have to do with salmon.
Probably.
Just thinking about salmon, more salmon, because it's such an important part of their diet. But that's a really good question. I mean, we're being sort of goofy about it, but I suppose it's possible that somebody in some research center has put electrodes on a bear's brain and looked for the signs of dreaming in the brain waves. But who's to say that they even would have the same brain activity that we have? So I don't know. Great question. I'm certainly going to take a look at that and see if anybody has detected that. You see what appears to be dreaming in dogs, but even with dogs, I'm not sure how similar it is to what we dream. But I'm going to go with my salmon dreams. That's what I imagine that they're dreaming about.
So again, if you want to post questions to us, keep them coming. We'll do our best to try to answer them for you. And another question that just sort of came up here. I read that sows will wake up when their cubs are born. Would the birth itself wake them up too? I think they maybe, yeah, they're probably they probably do wake up when the cubs are actually born, but really they're not doing too much at that time. A bear giving birth isn't necessarily like a human giving birth or other animals, because the cubs are actually extremely small in comparison to,
get out of the shadow here.
So, extremely small in comparison to the mother itself.
This is a cast of a bear paw, front paw from a bear, and there's my hand for comparison. At birth, the cubs are going to be like maybe about that big. They could rest on top of the mother's paw and still have a little bit of headroom and leg room. They are tiny, almost embryonic in their development. They have a very short gestation period, so they're born very small, and then they will work their way over to a teat and begin nursing immediately. And by the time, so they weigh less than a pound typically at birth, and by the time we see them down in locations like Brooks Camp in June or July, they may be 15 pounds. So they put on a lot of weight and they've grown substantially larger. But at birth, incredibly small, and so there probably isn't the distress that other animals feel when they're giving birth. So the waking up happens to some degree, but it's not a prolonged traumatic thing. Birth with bears, it's pretty uneventful in most cases because of the size of the bear or the cub.
And they're born at the perfect time of the year, of course. If they were to be born right now, for instance, it would be a terrible time of the year because the cubs are so small and so vulnerable they can't move around, and that would also put the mother at risk of maybe not surviving the wintertime. But when they're born in the middle of the den when she's sleeping, and they can nurse for months until she goes out of the den, that's the perfect time of the year for a bear cub to be born. So they really have a remarkable timing within to reproduce that allows them to give the cubs the best opportunity to survive.
The next question is, who's controlling the cameras? Is it park rangers, or can people volunteer to help? And the camera operators are primarily volunteer camera operators that Explore.org recruits and trains and provides them the access to those cameras. These volunteers are scattered all over the country. Some of them have volunteered on some of Explore's other webcams. Some of them are new, and the way they get recruited, at least this last year for the webcams, is they made a couple of announcements of postings on the Explore.org webpage asking for people that might be interested in controlling the cameras. And you have to agree to a few things like controlling up to 9 cameras for several hours at a time. You have to make sure that you've got internet that can handle that amount of data throughput. And you also want to make sure your internet isn't capped at a very small amount so that you don't use up all of your internet the first day when you're trying to control the cameras. So they have, and there's a minimum speed too. So they have some requirements like that, give you some training and some orientation materials, and then they schedule them to sign up for different times to control the cameras. So for the coming season, Explore may be recruiting for volunteers again, so I'd say just keep checking in on the explore.org webpage in the spring and see if they are recruiting. And when they are, we'll also make some announcements on the Park Service pages too, and let folks know that they would be looking for some more volunteers. And I think I got all the volunteer questions.
Okay,
yeah, that's it.
Okay, so
I think they do a great job. It's particularly amazing to think that these people are controlling these cameras from all over the United States, and I believe virtually none of them, maybe one of them, well, I know one has been here, but they've never been here. So they're volunteering of their time to this place that they haven't visited, so that millions of people can enjoy the bears. And I just think they do a great job, especially in light of the fact that they don't have the intimate feel for the lay of the land like people here would have. We can't control them because our internet isn't fast enough or cheap enough for us to buy more internet.
And frankly, I wouldn't be as good at it as most of the cam operators. They have much more practice than me. I've tried, and it's pretty hard to do. So
we've dabbled in it a couple of times, and they deserve tremendous thanks from everybody watching the cameras, and they have our gratitude here at the park because they make this all possible.
So another question here in our queue, and this has to do with bears' intelligence. Are bears as smart as wolves? And measuring the intelligence of an animal is very difficult because, of course, we can't give them an IQ test. But bears are thought to be very smart animals. In fact, a lot of people who train bears for movies, that you'll see them, maybe Bart the Bear, who's the most famous one. And I think that bear has died, and maybe there's a few other Hollywood bears that you might, see in films recently. But a lot of the trainers who train those bears for Hollywood, they say that you really only have to teach a bear something once and it's got it, especially if it's associated with food. You want to make the things that you want bears to do, you want to make them rewarding and easy, and maybe there is a food reward associated with that. The things that you don't want them to do, you want to make sure that they just don't have the opportunity to do. And that's what we try to do around here at Brooks Camp, especially because we do know that these animals are so smart. And I would say that I'd probably be willing to say that they are at least as smart as domestic dogs, and domestic dogs in many cases are just as smart as wolves. And again, that's only my personal opinion, of course, but we have to be very careful here at Brooks Camp to make sure that bears don't have the opportunity to ever get access to food or play toys. And a play toy can be anything that we leave behind at all. It could be a jacket that we leave on the ground. It could be a can of gasoline that is used in some of the boats, or a plane or something like that, a camera. Anything like that, because once a bear, again, learns a trick and learns that either food is associated with that item, or it's just a fun thing to play with, they may try to get those things again and again and again. And we want to make sure that we keep the bears' smarts focused on nature, and we don't want them, of course, trying to focus their intelligence on getting things from us, like food or play toys.
The next question is, what is the best advice should one ever encounter a bear, say, while out camping? The best thing is every place is a little bit different. So if you're getting ready to go backpacking or camping someplace, make sure you check with the local authorities in that area and see what they suggest for food storage, for where to locate campsites, places perhaps to avoid while you're traveling. So check with the locals first and see what they're recommending. But as a general sense, what you want to do with bears is have a lot of distance between you and the bear. And what a lot is varies from place to place. In some interior parts of the United States where you might encounter bears that don't have ready access to concentrated food sources, where they are not habituated to the presence of other bears or habituated to the presence of people. And by habituated, I mean, used to people being around. They expect people to be around, or they expect other bears to be around, and they tolerate that close proximity to these other animals or people. So bears in the interior typically lead more solitary lives. And so there, for example, you'd want to have more space between you and a bear. But space is a really good thing because it gives the bear time to decide what it wants to do, and you don't force an interaction where one doesn't need to be. So the ways you can make sure that the bear has space is try to travel in open country where possible so the bear can see you at a distance. Their eyesight's about as good as ours, so they can see things coming, and they may stand up and get a better look. That's not an aggressive thing. That's just curiosity. So travel where there's good visibility so you can have space. Make some noise. You don't have to walk through the forest banging a drum or ringing a cowbell all the time, but usually in most situations, having just conversations with the people you're traveling with, that's enough to let the bear know that you're there. Now, if it's really windy and the leaves are rustling or the grass is rustling, or you're by a river or you're walking on a lake and you've got water from noise from water, you might have to make some more noise there. But you're not trying to drive the bear in front of you like it's a cow and you're trying to herd it. You're just trying to alert this animal to your presence. And let's see, don't travel with things that are very odorous and attractive. Bears like sweet things. Bears like salmon. They like fish. They like bacon. So don't travel with a lot of food odors on you. Let's see, got make noise. What am I missing?
Food. And making sure, if you're camping, especially making sure that you don't don't have any attractions around your tent that would bring a bear into the area. So cooking away from your campsite, for instance, storing your food away from your campsites. Really, prevention is the key. You want to really make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent close encounters with the bear. And in some places, that can be really difficult. If you come to Katmai, for instance, and you're walking along a salmon stream, you're kind of putting yourself in a position where you're going to have close encounters with bears. So you want to be extra careful in those situations. But definitely, I think the best advice is try to prevent those situations from happening in the first place. And maybe that could be just altering your travel plans accordingly. If you're going to an area where there's known to be a lot of bears at a certain season and you're uncomfortable with that, maybe you want to go earlier in the year, you want to go later in the year, something like that. So you have less of a chance of actually encountering them.
And if you do get in a situation where you encounter one at close range, you want to talk to the bear in a soft voice, let it know that you're humans, what you're doing at that point, and they've been around humans for tens of thousands of years. They are wary of us in a general sense, and sometimes they investigate, trying to figure out what something is. It doesn't quite smell right. They don't have a good view, maybe, and so they investigate. Usually, once they find out you're human, they'll turn and they'll go away. So you'll talk to it in a soft voice, let it know you're human. Keep an eye on it. You want to make sure that you don't lose it in the forest. Now, this isn't like a stare, like you're trying to get your dog to bark at you. This is just keeping an eye on the animal. You're watching it, it's watching you, and then to back away slowly. Again, it's increasing some distance there. You want to make sure that there's time for reaction. If the bear does charge you, and it gets so complicated, you need to know if the bear is attacking, if the bear is bluff charging you. But generally, with a brown bear, you'll want to probably play dead if it comes right up to you, right at the point where it's about to make contact. Don't just drop and play dead the second you see a bear. But again, all of this stuff, the best thing to do is to talk to the authorities in the area where you intend to go backpacking or for a hike. Pick up the brochures that are there and read those thoroughly and ask the questions when you're there. I'm afraid in this situation we don't want to give you some information that would not be applicable, say, in Yellowstone or Glacier. So definitely check in with the locals before you head out to make sure you have the best information for that location.
And I would also add one final thing is to learn as much about bears as possible. The more you know about these animals, I think the easier it is for you to get an understanding of maybe their motivations if you do happen to encounter them when you're out hiking wherever you happen to be, in a national park, a national forest, or maybe even in your hometown too, because sometimes curious bears do come into town and you want to make sure that you're giving them the space they need to survive. So learn as much about them as possible, and that really has helped me become comfortable with the animals out here in Katmai. The more I know about them and their motivations and why they're doing certain things, then I can maybe react in a consistent manner around them. And if bears learn that people behave in a consistent manner, then they learn to behave in a consistent manner around us.
So jumping from that question, we have a specific one about one of the bears that we see frequently here on the cameras, and that is Ted, one of the favorites. Ted and Otis are right up there at the top. Is behavior such as Ted's begging and mooching learned from his mother, or is it something he just started to do on his own? And they learn a lot of their behaviors from their mothers, but I don't know that I have seen mothers teaching their cubs to beg. I don't know. Have you seen
No,
that?
no.
Because mothers with cubs tend to be so wary of other bears that they keep their distance. But what I imagine happened is that when Ted was a subadult, he was hanging around the edges of Brooks Falls or other places where bears were feeding and started picking up the scraps that were left, because in July, especially when the salmon are coming in, there's more salmon than they can eat at any one time. So they will high grade. They will just strip the skin off, eat the brains, eat the eggs if it's a female, maybe the tail where there's a concentrated fat source, and cast off the rest of it. So he may have started out just scavenging and got a little bit closer and I don't know, developed some pretty mean begging skills. He is very successful at using that technique and hardly ever gets slapped around.
And the bears aren't actively giving him fish because he's begging. He's maybe vocalizing, and I wish I could recreate it for you, but I'm not going to even try because it's certainly worth hearing. It's just a big bellow.
Whining bellow.
Yeah, that he makes. At the bears that are around him when he's doing that, he's probably learned that those other bears are tolerant of his presence, and that allows him to approach closely. But they're not actively giving him fish. So bears aren't known to hold that capacity for compassion or sharing or anything like that. So they're basically just going to finish their fish and let it drift downstream. And Ted, maybe by vocalizing like that, he gets in a position where he's likely to be able to pick up a lot of those scraps that are left behind. But the other bears are certainly not giving him fish.
It's effective in his case, but it also runs a high risk. One swat up to the side of his head could fracture his skull, his jaw, and then he would have problems. But it's been working for him for a number of years, and it's certainly fun to watch. Next question is, how good is bears' hearing? Could they hear the cameras clicking and zooming, for instance? And their hearing is adequate. It's on par with ours, perhaps a little bit better. And they do key in on noises that we make. They do hear cameras going. They hear when people inadvertently cheer when a bear catches a salmon or when a salmon makes it past a bear. We tell people to remain quiet so they don't disturb the bears, but sometimes human nature just takes over and you go, yay, it got through, and the bears will sometimes stop and look at what we're doing. But the sense that they rely on the most is their sense of smell. That is their strongest sense, better than a bloodhound's, and you can read up about that. It's truly an amazing skill that they have. And one way you can judge an animal's ability to detect sense is by the size of their nasal passages and the length of them. And so here's the nose, the nasal passage, and if this animal were alive, there would be some bony structures inside of there designed to help capture and retain scents and transmit them to the brain, and then the length of it. So when this animal was alive, and this is from an adult bear, I don't know what cause of death for this bear, but it's an adult bear from here in the park. Long nose, filled with sensory apparatus that would allow it to collect those scents and transfer them to the brain. So that's their super powerful, superhuman ability that they have, is that sense of smell.
All right. So another question in our queue here is, and I think this is about one of the Hollywood bears that we often see in movies. The person starts out by saying, I saw Brutus the bear once. That bear was amazing and does not seem at all violent. Is this because he grew up around humans, or is this just his personality? And it's probably a little bit of both. In my opinion, I don't know that bear, so I don't want to necessarily speak for that animal because I don't have any personal experience with it. But different bears do have different dispositions, and different personalities. They behave differently. Like a bear, like Ted, for instance, seems to be much more tolerant of other bears near him. He'll play with other bears, even though he's an older adult bear and he's kind of in his late teens, and we don't often see many of the bears his age playing with others, but he certainly will still play. So definitely personality and disposition has to do with it. So maybe Brutus has a disposition that makes him more tolerant towards people, but certainly it's because he is used to people as well too. I mean, being raised as a cub, and I think that bear was raised as a cub by his trainer. and being around people in a consistent manner and finding that people aren't an enemy necessarily, not a threat to them, not a competitor in any way, then bears have the ability to alter their behavior. And I think we've mentioned this before in other chats, that bears, they can modify their behavior. Their behavior is plastic, so it's not set in stone. They can modify their behavior in a way that gives them the best advantage to survive. And in Brutus's case, if he was a very aggressive bear towards people, he wouldn't be, doing what he's doing in life today. So, being tolerant of people, for instance, is allowing him, and being a smart bear, of course, and listening to instructions and everything like that. And there's a plane taking off, so you might not be able to hear me, but yeah, that allows him to survive. And in his mind, that's the best survival strategy he has. I do well by my trainer and the people around me, then I'm going to get well fed. And he's not necessarily doing it for a job because he likes it, but that's how he gets food. That's really how he makes his living.
I've spoken in the past with a bear trainer who was out here and said that it's a constant battle of dominance with them. Not fighting, but the bear that he works with will always try to occupy the same space that he's occupying. And so it's just subtle, but always just pushing around a little bit, just nudging him here and there, leaning against him and pushing. And he said it's just a constant battle to always let that animal know that who the boss is. So let's see, we have one more question, and that is, where are the bears today? Well, that's it. We see bears over in the other direction. I know you can't see them on this camera, and maybe the webcams can pick it up if they go upstream. But there are bears above the oxbow. There's a bear at an island just before the oxbow. We have names for everything here, so you can't look on a map and see the Big Island or Fiji or. The names can be sometimes kind of goofy, but they tend to be short and names that we don't confuse on the radio when we're communicating. And so I can see two bears right now that may be visible on the camera. But they're around. We had quite a delay this morning trying to get across the river. In fact, we almost missed our bear chat today because we were on the other side trying to get across, and we had 3, maybe 4 different bears that had come through the area and kept the bridge closed, including those 2 adults that were playing.
There are a lot of bears around right now, so maybe they're not on the cams right now. Maybe the cams are just missing. Again, we can't really see at the moment what they're looking at, but there are definitely bears around. And if you want to see a lot of bears, tune in right around sunrise, which is here in Alaska. That's about 7:30 in the morning. So if you are in the East Coast, that's going to be 4 hours ahead.
Keep talking, Mike.
Yeah. So there's a bear right below us now. So they're definitely around for sure. But overnight, salmon will continue to spawn, and they'll continue to die, and they'll drift downstream, and they'll collect in the eddies and side channels and out in the mouth, near the mouth of the river. And they'll collect in the lake as well, too. And the bears wake up in the morning and they're hungry. So in the mornings, it tends to be a very busy time in September and October right here around Brooks Camp. And that's a great opportunity to see a lot of different bears. Not only, big adult males, but you'll find females with cubs. You'll find younger bears, juvenile bears, like subadults, like the one that Roy was trying to show you just a little bit ago.
Yeah, I don't know how clear that was, and I think we're an inset in a picture, so it probably wasn't big enough. It's kind of unfortunate timing because one of the things that we wanted to do here at the very end was just go down and stand on the ground and let you look back up at the platforms, and maybe the bear will cooperate and move out of the way here in a second. We know that for going on 2 seasons now, or concluding 2 seasons now, you've been watching the bears from up here looking out, and we thought we might give you the chance to look back on the platform. We couldn't really do it up at the falls last week, but we can do it here if that bear moves on just a little bit more. We did have another question though, and that is, are we going to do any more of these live chats? I believe so. I think there's another one in conjunction with Disney Nature that might be in the works for next Wednesday, and I'm not sure if it'll be the same time or not. And that one will be in king salmon, because Mike and I place before Mike and I leave for the season, and if that works, we'd like to give you a view of what it looks like beyond the corner here. You know, for all this time, people have been watching bears disappear around this point here. They come, you know, this out there is the lake, and then the bears come around this gravel bar and disappear. That heads back toward the visitor center and the ranger station. And what we'd like to do is to set the camera up over there and give you a view of that area. And maybe there'll be some bears around. Maybe not, you know, who knows? It depends what the weather's doing and how many dead fish there are on the beach. But that's one thing that we'd like to do is to do that and show you a different area. And then almost immediately we're on the plane and we're heading out of here. Brooks Camp officially closed today. The last of the lodge guests will be flying out around 5 o'clock. And the Park Service is already busy closing up camp, putting boards on buildings and getting everything winterized. And for about the next 3.5 weeks or so, there will be maintenance workers and a few people from bear management and law enforcement person or two out here keeping tabs on the place until it's all boarded up and everybody moves out. And typically we are out of here on October 15th or so. And the cams, we hope, will still be running. We've given them good power supplies this year. We've increased the solar capacity. Last year, without those enhancements, we went till the first few days of November. This year, we're hoping, crossing our fingers, that we can go much further and provide that really rare opportunity to be here and see when the bears actually disappear. And that'll be something all of you can help us with, because we have to move out, like I said, in the middle of October. The last of us leave because it starts to really turn winter here. The lake freezes, you can't fly float planes anymore, etc. But the bear cams will give us that incredible opportunity to watch this area, hopefully well into November, until the last of the bears are seen. We got pretty far last year, but we're hoping we can get further this year. And
if we can take just one more minute, I think the bears have moved a little bit further away from us, and we can step down onto the ground, and then maybe point the camera here up to the webcam, so you can get a better idea of where they are mounted on our platforms here. So
let me see where are the bears today. I want to make sure that we don't miss a question. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is, when we take this laptop down and we walk down below and show you this, there is the possibility that we could get disconnected because of a Wi-Fi dead spot that we're not sure of. We haven't tried this before. In case that happens, thank you so much for tuning in again for this chat.
Yes,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
all the great questions. And we're going to do our best to try to have one of these next week. And hope that you can all tune in and have the wonderful questions ready for us. And I guess we'll go ahead and disconnect here and take a walk down and see if we can show you the platform. Try not to make people seasick as we're walking. Okay, so we are underneath the bear viewing platform, and right up there is one of the cameras, which you can see right up there. That's one of the cameras that looks around in various directions. Now we'll walk out here a little ways.
There's
so,
one bear upstream of the bridge now.
So unfortunately the sun is kind of in the way right behind it. Let's go over to this side. And then here's the view that you're mostly used to seeing from, and you can see the camera right on the edge of the platform there. And that's the lower river camera. The other one, the one that's backlit by the sun, that's the lower river east camera. And those are going to be the primary cameras that you'll be watching this fall. So keep tuning in and keep leaving those questions and comments on the website. And Mike and I will do our best to try to answer those in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, I'm often chatting in the comment section on explore.org, and I try to do that a couple times a week at least. So look for me on there, and I try to advertise when I'll be on there using Twitter and Facebook. So I try to be on there a few hours a week at least to answer your questions on there. So please look for me there as well.
Okay, we're right at an hour, actually a little bit more. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
All right, goodbye,
Bye.
everyone.